Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off today. Right now on Morning News Now, breaking news. Abe assassinated. Former Japanese leader Shinzo Abe shot and killed. The longtime prime minister who worked with multiple American presidents was attacked while campaigning for a member of his political party. New information we learned overnight as international reaction pours in. Griner pleads guilty. The WNBA star is back in jail this morning after telling a Russian court she accidentally threw cannabis oil cartridges in her bag while rushing to pack. We're digging into what comes next for Griner, including talk of a prisoner swap and why her plea may actually help speed up that process. On the record, Pat Cipolloni set to testify before the January 6th House Committee today. The former White House counsel will take the hot seat behind closed doors after he was subpoenaed by the committee.
He clearly has information about concerns about criminal violations, concerns about the president going to the Capitol that day, concerns about the chief of staff having blood on his hands if they didn't do more to stop that violent attack on the Capitol.
The key information lawmakers hope to learn after that jaw-dropping testimony from a former White House aide about former President Trump's actions that day and the efforts to call off the rioters. And breaking Broadway, the new show being acclaimed as a masterpiece. I sat down with the writer and the star of the Tony-winning musical A Strange Loop. We talk about the groundbreaking show's long journey to the Great White Way and how spotting a security detail in the audience recently tipped off the cast that someone special was in the house. We begin our show today with breaking news out of Japan. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has died in the hospital after being shot at a campaign event in a nation where gun violence is so incredibly rare. A warning, while the following video is not graphic, some viewers may find it disturbing. Abe was giving a speech in Western Japan when shots were fired at him. The suspect, a man, was quickly tackled to the ground and arrested at the scene. The country's current prime minister called the shooting unforgivable. Let's go straight to local journalist Kaori and Joji, who joins us from Tokyo with the latest. Kaori, thanks for being with us this morning. First, just walk us through what we know right now. How did all of this unfold?
Well, Joe, the nation is in mourning and in shock that the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has died from multiple gunshot wounds, we now know. He was in Western Japan in the city of Nara in broad daylight at around noon local time. He was giving a speech on behalf of a candidate that was running in local elections that are scheduled to be held here in Japan on Sunday. And as he was giving that speech, 2 gunshot wounds, according to eyewitnesses, were heard on the scene. He was then airlifted to a nearby hospital, and the physician who treated him at that hospital has spoken over the last hour or so, and he said that when the former prime minister arrived at the hospital, he did not have a heartbeat, and for hours they tried to resuscitate him, giving him what they described hundreds of milliliters of blood transfusions, but the physician said he saw 2 gunshot wounds around here, as he pointed to this area around his neck, that has pierced his heart, and they tried to stop the bleeding, but in the end, he bled out, and they confirmed that Shinzo Abe died at the age of 67 after a suspect who has been arrested shot reportedly 2 rounds during a regular routine speech in front of a train station in broad daylight in what is one of the most peaceful countries in the world. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, shootings like this are so incredibly rare in Japan with the country's zero-tolerance policy on gun ownership. As you mentioned, it's shocking to people there. It's shocking to people around the globe. Help us understand, how rare is gun violence in Japan, and what is some of the reaction on the ground there?
Well, the reaction is one of disbelief, and I think the Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida, summed it up very, very well when he said that this is an unforgivable act of, quote, despicable barbarity, and I think that is the sentiment echoed throughout Japan today. You talk about the debate over gun control in the United States. That kind of debate is non-existent in this country. Technically, you are allowed to carry a gun. You can get a gun license, but it is so difficult to get that license. You hear that you were interviewed multiple times, your relatives are interviewed multiple times, and even if you were able to get a gun, to get ammunition for the gun gun is even more difficult as well. So I think this gun attack on a former prime minister is just so out of the blue to ordinary citizens. I think people are still having a difficult time just getting their heads around that.
Kaori, global leaders are echoing some of the sentiments we just heard there from the current prime minister. They're condemning the shooting and they're paying tribute to Abe. As Japan's longest-serving prime minister, what is his legacy? How is he going to be remembered, not just there, but really on the global stage?
Yep. Shinzo Abe, as you pointed out, is Japan's longest-serving prime minister. He held the premiership twice and for a total of nearly 8 years. And I think that is one of the biggest reasons why you're hearing this outpouring of sympathy from presidents and prime ministers all around the globe. But you also have to remember that his party, the Liberal Democratic Party, is a huge party that ideologically swings very widely from left to right. And make no mistake, Shinzo Abe was to the right of that spectrum. His hallmark and he wanted his own legacy to be revising the Japanese constitution, the pacifist constitution, to try and give the Japanese military a stronger military, a more unapologetic Japan, in his words alone. I think will be his legacy. But I think on top of that, there was a period of what was known internationally as Abenomics, where he tried to revive Japan's economy to mixed results. And I think all of these things combined to a point where he had very troubled relationship with his neighbor, South Korea, in particular, because of his stance towards the Japanese constitution. But I also think people remember him very actively courting the former U.S. President Donald Trump, planking him to golf and trying to avert a kind of trade war that erupted in previous eras between the U.S. and Japan. And I think there will be people who give him some degree of success for that. But I think at the end of his premiership, and he resigned nearly 2 years ago, he was faced with the COVID crisis. Remember, COVID broke out here with the Princess, the cruise ship, and he had mixed results in trying to contain that. But he was one of the first prime ministers to declare a state of emergency here in Japan, which was really unheard of until then. But he is from a political dynasty. His father was a foreign minister. His grandfather was a former prime minister. So needless to say, he was a blue blood politician. And as you're hearing from remarks from all around the world, and of course domestically as well, he was an iconic political figure, and his influence was felt long after he left the prime minister's office nearly 2 years ago, Joe.
Kaori and Joji, thank you so much for joining us from Tokyo, where a nation is in mourning. We appreciate it. WNBA star Brittney Griner now faces up to 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to drug-related charges in a Moscow court. Griner was arrested in February after authorities found vape canisters with cannabis oil in her luggage. Now pressure is growing for the Biden administration to do more to secure her release and bring her home. Let's bring in NBC News reporter Matt Bodner, who's been tracking this case from London. Matt, good morning to you. So walk us through exactly what happened yesterday. What are Griner and what are her attorneys saying?
Joe, good morning. Well, yesterday we weren't really sure what to expect from the hearing, and I have to say it was, by Russian court standards, very short, about 2 hours. And we saw U.S. Embassy personnel enter the courtroom. That was different from her first hearing, so there was definitely more activity. And by the time she came out, we learned that she had admitted to guilt, that she was guilty on all charges, and her lawyers kind of clarified the situation later, saying that they were now counting on leniency from the Russian court. When she was admitting that she was guilty, she was insisting that she had no intent to commit a crime. So they're hoping, again, on leniency, recognition of her of the work she's done in Russia, kind of her goodwill efforts and such. So that's what they're banking on, at least officially right now. Of course, there appears to be a little bit of a political game going on behind the scenes as well.
I mean, Matt, this all comes just days after Griner wrote a letter to President Biden asking for help. Then on Wednesday, the president reassured Griner's wife that he was working to secure her release. What more do we know about those efforts?
So there's not too much to say about these efforts right now. Suffice it to say that the U.S. government does appear to be coming around to the idea of an exchange. We saw an exchange happen earlier this year with Trevor Reed. He was one of the other notable Americans. And that was interesting because throughout these cases, remember Paul Whelan, the first detainee, that happened in 2017. So everyone has known for a while kind of what's going on here, but the U.S. has only recently seemed to kind of come around to the idea that there might need to be trades to get these people out. So whatever is being said in these letters, we don't specifically know. Of course, there was Secretary of State Tony Blinken with a statement reassuring Griner and her family, as well as Whelan's family, that they're doing everything they can to get them out. But at the end of the day, the Russian government has to want to trade with the United States. So they have to, if this is going to happen, they have to offer somebody up that the Russians really want. We, of course, hear all kinds of names all the time. But it really comes down to a political will on both sides.
So, Matt, what are you keeping an eye on for what happens next, and what could this guilty plea mean for Brittney?
Sure. So I think the important thing to always keep in mind with the Russian court process is it can be extremely lengthy, really tedious in the end, and also you have a very low chance of ever beating any charge that is brought against you by the state. State almost always gets what it wants. So Griner, by stepping up in this hearing and admitting guilt, I think is hoping to speed up this process to get to the point where the Russians will start talking about trades, because they have been very straightforward on that regard, saying they're not going to talk about anything until the court has reached a verdict. And if you fight these kinds of charges, you're just going to delay it. I've seen these cases go on for months with opposition figures, for example. So that seems to be what Griner's legal team has decided to do here.
Matt Bodner knows this system well. Matt, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Now to Highland Park, Illinois, where days after Monday's mass shooting, the suspect's family is apologizing to those who lost loved ones. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa brings us the latest from the scene of the shooting.
Good morning from Highland Park. You can see 4 days later, the scene of the 4th of July massacre is still closed off. That scene's still under investigation after 7 people here were killed. Dozens more were injured, and stories of survival and, frankly, of pure pain continue to pour out. Among them yesterday, we talked to a father and son who said they were here getting breakfast along this main street the morning of the shooting. When they heard the gunshots, they came running to help the injured, and they say they spotted what was clearly a child lying under a body. It turns out it was 2-year-old Aiden McCarthy, and they pulled little Aiden out from under the body of his father, Kevin, who was among the 7 killed. I asked if Aiden said anything.
He kept on saying, he does say a few words as he's saying shots, shots. And he would say mom shot, dad shot. And he just kept on saying that.
He was saying mom shot, dad shot.
He was. He kept on saying shots, shots. And we were talking to Kevin. We were saying, your son's going to be all right. Everything's all right. You're a hero. We just kept on talking to him pretty much to the end.
2-year-old Aiden McCarthy, now reportedly with his grandparents, also knew this morning the uncle of the suspect apologizing to the victims and to the people of Highland Park for what he says his nephew did, telling them that he couldn't believe it when he saw the news. He lived with his nephew, so he said he was really stunned when he saw his nephew's photo popping up on the news and heard the story of what had happened in his city. When asked if he had anything to say to his nephew, he simply responded, no. It's also worth noting today, the first funerals are scheduled. Among them, Jackie Sundheim, the preschool teacher who loved volunteering at her synagogue, and Nicholas Toledo. Back to you.
Maggie Vespa, thank you so much for that report. Breaking news this morning out of the White House. President Biden will sign an executive order aimed at protecting Americans' access to abortion after the Supreme Court's ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade. President Biden's actions will focus on safeguarding women's personal health information, along with expanding access to federal-approved abortion medication. The move comes after the president faced mounting pressure from Democrats to take more action to secure abortion rights for women. President Biden is also expected to speak on the matter later this morning. In the battle against COVID, the Omicron BA.5 subvariant is now the most dominant strain in the U.S. The CDC says BA.5 was responsible for around 54% of the infections recorded last week. It comes as we're seeing a surge in case numbers and hospitalizations across the country. The daily average for new cases has crossed the 100,000 mark, and the daily average for new hospital admissions is now more than 5,000. NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joins us now for more on all this. Dr. Torres, so we know that this BA.5 variant is really behind the surge in the hospitalizations. What do we know? How is it spreading so quickly? How does it compare to the previous variants? And is it more serious as far as symptoms go?
So there's a variety of things going on right now that's causing it to spread more quickly. And part of it's the virus itself. And what we know is, BA.5 has become the dominant. Originally it was 4 or 5, two different variants, but now it's separated where 5 is becoming the dominant. And that has to do with the spike protein and the wall and the mutations that are in that area of the coronavirus itself. But on top of that, what's happening around the world we're seeing is kind of the trifecta of events. Number one, we're having greater transmissibility. It can transmit from person to person. It's simply more contagious. It is better able to evade our immunity. So if you have a natural immunity, if you've had vaccines, it seems to be able to evade them to a certain extent. Although those vaccines in particular are still protecting you from serious illness and hospitalizations. And then the third part of that trifecta is the fewer mandates that we have out there, because people simply have gotten tired throughout the pandemic. They're not masking as much. I mean, if you go on an airplane, go anywhere, you see like hardly anybody wearing masks these days. And that is causing it to spread as well. And because of that, we're seeing more and more people getting it, not just here, but around the world. And as far as how more serious it is, we know it's more contagious. Anecdotally, we're hearing that people are having more serious symptoms at home. They're saying, I've been in bed for a day or two, but they're not getting hospitalized at nearly the rate they were at the beginning of the Omicron or during the Delta spread itself. And so that's part of the good news.
Which is the key, and the vaccines play an important role in that. So how effective have the vaccines been, and are they going to be modified to try and treat these new subvariants? And if so, when would we expect to see those changes to the vaccine?
So with the vaccine, it's been kind of the double-edged sword here. It's been good and bad. The bad part is it seems to not protect us from getting sick from Omicron, especially the BA.5, as much as we'd like. But the good part of it is it's protecting us from serious illness, hospitalizations, and death, which at the end of the day, that's what we really want it to do. And what we're seeing in the deaths are typically those who are elderly with compromised immune systems, or those that are unvaccinated seem to be dying at a higher rate than those that are vaccinated. But as far as what's going to happen in the fall, the FDA has advised manufacturers to make a bivalent vaccine that's going to have 2 different variants in it. The original, which is the original strain back 2 years ago, and then the BA.4/5, which is the one they think will happen in the fall and still be the dominant one. So they're taking a bit of a gamble on that one, but hopefully it works.
I'm going to read off a few countries here that are seeing some really significant rises: Greece, Spain, France, Germany, the Caribbean islands, Morocco. So if you're planning to go there anytime soon, should you change your plans, or then how do you prepare if you are going to those places to be as safe as possible?
And the answer I'm going to give is it depends. So if you have people, or if you yourself are immunocompromised or have high-risk medical issues, then yes, you probably want to change your plans. But for everybody else, I say go ahead and go with your plans. But one thing to remember, the mask. Again, none of us really like it all that much, but it is something that is really helpful. We know that unilateral transmission is blocked by the mask. So if I wear one, but nobody else around me is wearing one, I am protected. And so it's something you want to do. Not the most convenient thing, but one of the most powerful things we have right now.
I'm surprised how few people I see wearing masks right now, even here in New York. So
and of course, get
we'll
vaccinated
as
well.
There you go. Good advice as always. Dr. John, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. The UK is dealing with the fallout from Prime Minister Boris Johnson's dramatic resignation. The Conservative Party leader announced he would be stepping down after a series of scandals led to more than 50 members of the government quitting, including some top cabinet ministers. NBC News contributor and Sky News anchor Wilfred Frost joins us now with more on this. Good to have you with us. So Johnson says he's going to remain in power until his successor is named, but many say he should step down right away. So what happens next, and is there any way he could be forced out sooner?
Well, I mean, Joe, there's not obviously tons of examples of when a prime minister's forced out in the middle of their parliamentary term. But in fact, when it does happen, the norm is that they stay in place until their successor is chosen. That's what happened, for example, when Boris Johnson took over from Theresa May in the summer of 2019. She was in place during the leadership process that picked Boris Johnson. Of course, anything is possible in British politics right now, but what's likely is it'll be about an 8-week process. It's 2 stages. Stage 1 will take about 2 weeks, where the 358 Conservative MPs will narrow the list of runners down to a final 2, probably from an initial about 10. And then those 2 will tour the country over the following 6 weeks until the 200,000 strong Conservative Party membership base makes the final choice. So it's not a vote of the entire country. It's not a general election. And we should get the successor in about 2 months' time.
So that's the how of how this would work. The other big question is the who. We just saw some names on the screen a few minutes ago. Some people have already thrown their name in the hat in the race to succeed Johnson. Are there any favorites right now at this early stage?
The betting markets give Ben Wallace, the defense secretary, and Rishi Sunak, the former finance minister, until Monday when he resigned, a bit of a slight lead in terms of being favourites at this stage. But really, it's an incredibly open race, and any of those names on the screen have a good chance. Why is it so open? Because it's not an issue-based leadership election like it would typically be when these sorts of oustings happened. For example, again, when Boris Johnson took over from Theresa May, it was because the Conservative Party wanted a harder Brexit. They wanted a clearer Brexit, and Boris Johnson was the obvious person to represent this. This has been more about sort of ousting Boris Johnson for his personal issues, almost at any cost, and worrying about what comes next later. And we're now at that stage, and they're going to decide, the party, what indeed comes next.
So to put it mildly, Boris Johnson was a highly polarizing figure in UK politics, frequently overshadowed by controversies, by scandals. So overall, what is the legacy he leaves behind, and how significant was his time in office?
Well, I think, Joe, comfortably the most significant thing was that he did deliver Brexit after, of course, it had met quite a few obstacles and been delayed multiple times after the initial vote to leave in the EU referendum back in 2016. The other very significant part of his legacy is taking a tough line on Russia very early during the war in Ukraine and maintaining that throughout. And clearly, the reciprocal support for Ukraine has been clear, a very loud voice within continental Europe on that issue. But the bottom line really is he's going to be one of the shortest serving prime ministers in modern times, a little bit shorter than Theresa May, a little bit longer than Gordon Brown, and failing really to deliver that much, particularly domestically, despite a massive majority that he earned in 2019. And it was illuminating, I thought, in his resignation speech that he did point quite a few times to the size of that electoral victory in December 2019, which perhaps he didn't realize also kind of implied he didn't have too much to talk about since then.
Wilfred Frost, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Have a good weekend. Now, a little closer to home, parts of the country could see some strong storms this weekend. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now with your morning News Now weather. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, Joe. Great to see you. And yeah, we're going to see storms this weekend. We're also seeing really dangerous temperatures. So that's what we're following as we go throughout today into the weekend. Today, 57 million Americans under some sort of heat alert, whether it's a heat advisory or an excessive heat warning. Where you see the pink, that is your excessive heat warning. So Nashville, Little Rock, down to Dallas, we're looking at temperatures into the upper 90s, triple digits. Where you see the orange, that is your heat advisory. And this will last through Sunday. So temperatures today into the triple digits for some. 101 in Tulsa. It's going to feel like 109. Little Rock, 102, feeling like 112 today. It's going to feel like 108 in Dallas, and will feel like 109 in Houston. So we have the high heat, we have the high humidity. You combine that, and that's where we're looking at that feels like temperature. Tomorrow, no relief from the heat. We're looking at temperatures once again climbing into the triple digits. Dallas, 104, feeling like 107. It will feel like 110 in Little Rock. And then that heat's going to slide to the east as we head throughout the later part of the weekend into early next week. So by Tuesday, New York City into the low 90s. Richmond, 91 on Tuesday, 91 also in Charlotte. Cincinnati, you're going to be into the 90s by Monday. Now, this heat, the humidity is so dry in Texas. 9 months ago, we were at less than 1% of Texas was in a drought. But look what happened as we look towards today. We're looking at 86% of Texas is in a drought. That's a really dangerous situation. And we're looking at 46% of that in extreme drought. So we're adding to that as we go day by day. It's been so dry and so hot. We continue to add the heat there. And we're going to see that heat throughout the next couple of days. We have that area of high pressure that's fueling those storms. It's fueling the heat. And we're seeing storms kind of ride along that high pressure. So we're seeing that in the Central Plains into the Ohio Valley. And that's what we're going to watch today in terms of any severe weather. We're looking at the threat for some gusty winds gusting to 60 miles per hour. Could see some damaging hail as well, and the chance of a few tornadoes. So once again, Montana, you could see some severe weather into parts of North Dakota as well. 7 million at risk, kind of honing in here on parts of the Ohio Valley, Lexington, Louisville, Evansville, Bowling Green. You could see the chance of some strong to severe storms today. Joe?
Weekend for some folks around the country. Thanks, Michelle. We'll see you next hour.
Sure.
Coming up, the campaign trail is heating up and crime is becoming a central issue. How it's resonating with voters as they prepare to head to the ballot box. Got that next. Former President Trump's White House counsel, Pat Cipolloni, is testifying in front of the January 6th Select Committee today. He was subpoenaed last week, just a day after White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson testified. Today's meeting is behind closed doors, but it's being transcribed and videotaped. NBC reporter Gary Grumbach is in Washington, outside the building where that meeting is going to take place. Gary, good morning to you. So first off, tell us what we can expect from this closed-door meeting today, and can we expect then the tape from Cipolloni to be used and played in future public hearings?
Hey there, Joe. Yeah, first off, we are expecting Pat Cipolloni to walk through these doors behind me in the next few hours, go upstairs and meet with the committee for the very first time. This is a real sought-after witness here because of where he was and when he was there. He was the Trump White House counsel from 2018 on. He was, in fact, the White House's lead defense argument maker for the first impeachment trial. When it came to the second impeachment trial, he said he wanted no part of it because of Trump's election fraud claims when it came to that situation. And he was also been mentioned by nearly every other witness during these past few hearings that we have seen related to January 6th. We've heard him talked about by Jason Miller. We've heard him from Cassidy Hutchinson, and we've heard from Jared Kushner and Ivanka. They've all put him in the room where decisions are being made. And so as it relates to whether or not we'll see testimony from Pat Cipolloni in future hearings, we've seen it from Bill Barr. We've seen it from Jason Miller. We've seen it from Ivanka and Jared Kushner. There's no doubt we'll see it from Pat Cipolloni as well.
Gary, you mentioned Cassidy Hutchinson, who testified in front of the committee just a day before Cipolloni was subpoenaed. What was it from her testimony that made the committee really want to put on this pressure to call on the former Trump counsel?
Well, this is somebody they've wanted to talk to for months now. Back in April, he held an informal meeting, less of a deposed situation, but an informal meeting back in April with the committee. This is going to be a much more serious, deposed, on camera, under oath situation. But what Cassidy Hutchinson put him in the room for, especially these conversations as it relates to whether or not Donald Trump was going up to the Capitol or wanted to go up to the Capitol on January 6th, that puts him in a place where he knows what he's talking about here. And, you know, at NBC News, we have a rule where if it's two sources, we sort of report it. This is the same kind of situation here where Cassidy Hutchinson said something under oath. If Pat Cipolloni does too, that's two sources they have. Joe?
Good way to explain that there. So what is next after today? We know that the committee has a big hearing on Tuesday, another one of those public hearings. What can we expect there?
Yeah, this is going to be a hearing about domestic extremists and how they related to January 6th. Of course, we've seen a number of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers that have been arrested and charged with crimes as it relates to what they did on January 6th. This is going to be about their connections to the Trump world, who they had conversations with, who they didn't have conversations with. And we've seen a lot of this videotape from documentarian Alex Holder. We're sure that's going to be a big part of this because that man with a camera was in all of these meetings, in all of these rooms, and he sure has some of this on camera. Joe?
All right, Gary Grumbach in Washington. We know you'll be keeping an eye on it throughout the day, Gary. Thanks so much. Now we're taking a look at crime in America, which has become a focal point on the campaign trail. After a string of horrific mass shootings in the U.S., the issue of gun violence is front and center in the key Ohio Senate race. NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor joins us from D.C. with more. She's also the moderator of Washington Week on PBS. So, Yamiche, Republican Senate nominee J.D. Vance is pushing for the U.S. to be tougher on crime. You spoke to him. You also spoke to his competitor, Congressman Tim Ryan. What did they tell you, and what are the differences in how they want to tackle this important issue?
Well, what's clear is that crime is taking center stage this midterm season amid spiking crime in different cities across this country. And of course, with these mass shootings continuing to focus the nation's attention on gun violence, this is really an issue where Democrats and Republicans are battling it out. In Ohio, in particular, J.D. Vance, the Republican, he's saying that in a lot of these mass shootings that there are red flags, that there are signs that people who are going to do bad things and possibly kill people, that they are sort of can be flagged, then there are laws that can impact them very directly, though he is also saying that there should be laws to protect people's Second Amendment rights. On the Democratic side, Tim Ryan is saying that there needs to be real focus on crime and policing, but he's also saying that there needs to be accountability for police. He, of course, signed on and supported and voted for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But the really interesting thing here is that Democrats in particular, who had been talking for a long time about police reform, they have really in some ways started to echo the Republican stance, saying that they need to be more tough on crime, that crime needs to be center stage, that police officers need to get more resources. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance is doing everything he can, along with a lot of Republicans, to paint Democrats, and in particular Tim Ryan, as soft on crime.
So a number of politicians want to make this a key issue. Is it a key issue for voters? How's all this resonating with them?
Voters I talk to are very concerned about crime, and they're also concerned about police accountability. I had this really interesting experience where I talked to two Cleveland residents who were both impacted by shootings. Brenda Beckerstaff, her brother was killed by the police in 2002. She's worried that Democrats are talking too much about being tough on crime and not enough about police accountability. But then there's Erica Ingram, whose son was killed in neighborhood violence in 2019, and she told me that she really thinks Democrats are not doing enough to tackle crime. They're not taking it seriously enough. Listen to what both of them had to say to me.
Lazy. They don't fight hard enough for me. As the Republicans, they gonna fight. It's like the Democrats just be like, oh, well, we got 10-1. We just, okay, we give in. The Republicans gonna fight.
Stop straddling the fence and keep it real on the issues that we're dealing with. Can you still be tough on crime and still have police accountability? Of course you can. Make sure that your detectives and the police officers are trained, and they're trained to be able to have and arrest.
What's interesting is that both of them are undecided about who they are going to vote for. But Erica Ingram, again, whose son was killed in 2019, she says for the first time in her life, as a lifelong Democrat, she's thinking about voting Republican because she's impressed with J.D. Vance. So that tells you the Democrats have a lot of work to do in the state of Ohio.
Thank you, Yamiche, for your reporting. And you can catch more of her reporting tonight on NBC Nightly News at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. 22-time Grand Slam tennis champion Rafael Nadal shocked fans by withdrawing from Wimbledon yesterday. The move came right before his semifinal match against Nick Kyrgios, who now moves right to the final. Nadal announced during a news conference he was withdrawing because of an abdominal muscle injury. It's unclear if and when the tennis legend plans to return to the court. We're all wishing Rafa a speedy recovery. There were a lot of legal headlines this week, from Brittney Griner to Derek Chauvin. So we're going to break those down and more with Danny Ceballos when we come back. Stay with us. As midterm election campaigns heat up, former President Trump is looking to maintain his influence in key battleground states. He's handed out several endorsements to GOP candidates looking to secure seats in the Senate. Despite his work on the campaign trail, the former president is still dealing with pending investigations of his own. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has the story.
Multiple investigations into former President Trump intensifying this week. But it's not stopping him from wading into proxy battles across the country for control of the Republican Party.
Endorsed by President Trump, Kari Lake for governor.
In Arizona, Trump's candidate, Kari Lake, in a heated GOP primary matchup against Karen Taylor Robeson. She was endorsed on Thursday by current Arizona Republican Governor Doug Ducey. It was Ducey who screened Trump's call while certifying Trump's 2020 election loss in the state.
There's only one great candidate for governor this year, Karen Taylor Robeson, and I'm proud to support her.
This after a fiery debate between the candidates.
Mamma mia. I feel like I'm on an SNL skit here.
The growing rift in the party as Trump prepares to head out on the campaign trail this weekend to Nevada for a rally, helping lift his pick for the U.S. Senate there, Adam Laxalt, who will take on incumbent Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto in November, and then to Alaska to support Sarah Palin, who is running for Congress, returning a favor from 6 years ago when she campaigned for him in Iowa.
Are you ready to make America great again?
And Kelly Chewbacca,
the woke leftist, tried to cancel me,
who Trump is hoping will oust the state's current Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who voted to convict the former president after his impeachment for January 6th.
Lisa Murkowski, someone who's supposed to fight for Alaska, stopped fighting for us years ago.
This after Wednesday night's Republican debate for Michigan governor, where each of the candidates tried to outprove their loyalties to Trump in the state he lost in 2020.
Yes, I was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th.
President Trump is still my president.
These Republican races as the January 6th Select Committee continues its investigation. Its next public hearing is Tuesday, and a district attorney in Atlanta, in an interview with NBC News' Blaine Alexander, not ruling out a subpoena for the former president regarding potential interference in the 2020 election.
We're going to do our due diligence.
Plus, just over 1 week from now,
over the course of the investigation,
Trump is slated to be deposed by lawyers from the New York State's Attorney General's office as part of its civil investigation into the Trump Organization and its assets. For Trump, a continued battle on two fronts, against persistent probes and for pure political power.
Now, thanks to Von Hilliard for that report. Now, former President Trump is also facing apparent trouble within his own media company. According to state documents, the former president was removed as a director from the board of Trump Media and Technology Group. The firm disputes the claim, saying that Trump is still the chairman. Now to a look back at some of the biggest legal headlines this week. We've seen major developments in several high-profile trials, including the civil rights trial against Derek Chauvin and Brittney Griner's trial in Russia. NBC News legal analyst Danny Cipolloni joins us now to break it all down for us. Danny, good morning to you. Let's start with that Chauvin sentencing. The former Minneapolis police officer was sentenced to a little more than 20 years in prison yesterday for violating George Floyd's civil rights when Floyd was detained and died back in 2020. So what happens to Chauvin now, and how does this factor into the previous sentences from his previous conviction?
Yeah, the way this works, the rule is that whatever sovereign, state or federal, had the first arrest gets primary custody. And that means that the defendant serves that sentence first, and then the minute he's released, he goes over and he serves his federal sentence, in this case, because the federal case came second. So the key here is if a judge makes a recommendation to the Bureau of Prisons that the defendant can serve his sentence in a state prison, well, that recommendation could be ignored by the Bureau of Prisons, or they could take it. But ultimately, the default rule, believe it or not, is consecutive sentencing. In other words, he serves the complete state sentence, then the complete federal sentence, end after end. Consecutive sentencing is one of the worst things that can happen to a defendant in sentencing.
Danny, I want to ask you about another high-profile case, one we talked about earlier this hour. That's Brittney Griner. The WNBA star has now pleaded guilty to drug charges in a Russian court. Talk us through this plea. Is that the best option for Griner, both in the short term and in the long term?
Two ways of approaching this. Is it the best choice criminally in the criminal justice system in Russia? And then politically? I mean, this may be just a case of, look, what do I have to say to better my chances of a negotiated release between the United States and Russia? I'll be honest with you, Joe, this is not an unusual case. Americans get arrested abroad all the time. What is unusual is that Americans still think somehow that America can help them if they get arrested when they're on spring break in Mexico or traveling on business and they bring drugs to a place that doesn't look kindly on drugs. So in this case, it's always a matter of negotiation. The government, the U.S. government will tell you, hey, we'll send somebody from the embassy to give you a toothbrush and some reading materials. But after that, you're on your own. So in a sense, Brittney Griner has gotten much more than the average unknown American would, who does often get arrested abroad that we never hear about.
Finally, Danny, I want to ask you, we have an update on the Theranos trials. Former executive Sunny Balwani was found guilty of all 12 fraud charges that were against him stemming from his time at the blood testing startup. We know the founder, Elizabeth Holmes, is currently awaiting sentencing. She was convicted in January on 4 out of 11 counts of fraud. So will we see similar sentences for both of them here, or could one get more than another?
You will probably see similar sentences, and that's because the federal sentencing guidelines and federal law calls for or pushes for similarly situated defendants to be sentenced to similar sentences. So you can't think of any more similar defendants than these two co-defendants who were essentially charged with the same crimes. They were tried separately, but that was a procedural issue. They might as well have been tried together. And of course, Sunny Balwani probably didn't benefit from the fact that everybody in the known universe already heard all these facts, knew Elizabeth Holmes had been convicted, and then he has to go through his trial. So probably not a benefit to him as a defendant.
Danny Cipolloni helping us look at a few key legal headlines this week. Thanks so much. Have a good weekend. Coming up, with temperatures heating up, hot car deaths are tragically on the rise. Up next, we're going to go one-on-one with an expert to talk about how quickly the situation can become deadly and what parents need to do to make sure it does not happen to them. We're back with an important safety warning during these summer months about hot car deaths involving children. According to the nonprofit kidsincars.org, 10 children have died after being left in hot cars so far this year. 23 children died in hot cars all of last year. The last 3 deaths involved children 1 year old or under. Most recent just this month in North Carolina, when a 12-month-old girl died after she was left in a car while her father was at work. Joining us now is Amy Artuso, Senior Program Manager of Mobility Safety of the National Safety Council. Amy, good to have you with us. Sadly, this isn't new. I know I'm on the email listserv that gets updates every few days on these tragedies. We report on them several times each year. How does this happen so often to so many families?
Well, this topic is really relevant for everybody, even if you live in a neighborhood with small children. So people tend to not understand that children don't regulate body temperature as well as adults, and how quickly vehicles become dangerously hot. In the first 10 minutes that a car is closed up, the temperature inside the car increases about 20 degrees. And in the first half hour, 80% of the total heat increase that's going to happen in the vehicle takes place. And so we often hear about children being forgotten in vehicles, and that makes up about half of the deaths. The other half comes from children gaining access to unlocked vehicles. And then the third leading cause is children being knowingly left in a vehicle, not with malintent typically, but because people don't understand vehicle heating dynamics, how quickly cars heat up into what dangerous temperatures, and that children don't regulate their body temperature as well as adults.
I think that information is so important. People don't realize just how quickly a car can get so hot. At what temperature, then, can a child actually have heat stroke?
So when their core body temperature reaches 107 degrees, that's when the situation becomes fatal. So if you look at the temperatures that everybody's been experiencing and how quickly the cars heat up, it doesn't take long at all for that situation to become fatal for a child.
So here's the key. What are the best things we can do to prevent these deaths, to make sure they don't happen? What are the most important tips that parents may not think enough about that they need to be doing every time they're in the car with their kids?
Well, often this happens when people are outside of their regular routine. And so slow down. Always check the back seat before you walk away from a vehicle. Always lock your vehicle so children can't gain access. Teach your children that vehicles are not play areas. And you can put something in the front seat when your child is in the back seat to serve as a visual reminder that your child is back there.
All right, Amy Artuso with some useful advice that will hopefully save many lives this summer. Amy, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. A woman in Florida is fighting for her life after a rescue team pulled her from an overturned SUV. She was unconscious when she was rescued from the car, which was in a water-filled ditch. NBC News correspondent Stephen Romo takes us through the intense moments captured on police body camera.
What's the emergency, ma'am?
There is a vehicle upside down in the ditch, and I do not know if anyone is in the vehicle.
Some quick thinking by a few Good Samaritans leading to a rescue in Volusia County, Florida, northeast of Orlando.
She's unresponsive.
After an SUV veered off the road and overturned in a water-filled ditch on Tuesday. First responders arriving on scene 8 minutes after the first 911 call came in.
We saw a car upside down in the ditch.
You said upside down? Then working together with witnesses to turn the half-submerged car over.
There's somebody in there. Can we get this thing flipped or not?
The driver stuck inside and unconscious.
We need some help pushing.
Police released this edited body cam footage showing the moments the SUV was finally flipped. Hey, give me a knife. Officials cutting the airbags and then later lifting the woman out of the driver's side window and onto a backboard. Then out of the water, where first responders performed life-saving measures. The sheriff's department says she still had a pulse. The woman, whose identity is still unknown, was transported to a nearby hospital where she remains in critical condition as of Thursday afternoon, according to authorities. But first responders and neighbors stepping up to give her a fighting chance. Stephen Romo, NBC News.
Turning now to the economy, Wall Street is anticipating this morning's job report will not show an economic slowdown. CNBC's Christina Partsinevelos joins us now with that and other money headlines. Hey, Christina.
Good morning. So right now, Wall Street is trying to start the day in the green ahead of the big economic report of the week, and that's the jobs report. It's expected to show hiring likely slowed in June, but was still solid despite growing fears the U.S. may slip into a recession. Forecasts call for employers to have added 250,000 jobs last month, so that would actually be the lowest monthly gain over the past year. Unemployment is expected to hold at 3.6% for the fourth straight month. That's just above a 50-year low. Amazon is betting on influencers to help drive sales on Prime Day. Its live stream shopping market, Amazon Live, is hosting chats with creators. Prime Day will also feature celebrity cameos, including comedian Kevin Hart and supermodel Miranda Kerr. A recent study shows 92% of Gen Z shoppers have bought an item based on a recommendation by an influencer. And Instacart is launching a new rewards program called Cart Star. Shoppers can earn points in 3 categories, gold, platinum, and diamond, based on the number of orders they complete over a 3-month span. They must keep an average customer rating of 4.7, and diamond shoppers get first access to delivery slots before stores can open. They can also get 2 days of caregiving for a child, senior, or pet for just $1 an hour or $10 a day. And this is through Instacart's partnership with Care.com. Shoppers on all levels can get cash back on gas and discounts on car repairs. Can you believe it? $1 an hour or $10 a day for a caregiver?
Not bad. I like a good rewards program, so not a bad idea.
Yeah. Just would you want to pay $1 an hour? I don't know. I'm a little on the fence with that.
I'm not sure either, but
yeah.
We'll see what happens. All right. Thanks, Christina. Appreciate it. Coming up, it's only been on Broadway for a few months, but it's already selling out shows and winning awards. Up next, I sat down with the writer and star of A Strange Loop to talk about its nearly 2-decade-long journey to the stage and the special visit that shocked the cast. We're back with some history for the NFL this morning. The league is celebrating its first black female team president. The Las Vegas Raiders introduced Sandra Douglas Morgan as their new president yesterday. She is a Las Vegas native and no strangers to first. She was also the first black city attorney in the state of Nevada and the first black chair of the Nevada Gaming Control Board. Morgan's hire comes as a tumultuous time for the Raiders. She's the 3rd team president this year alone. She says that she welcomes the challenges, adding that while she may be the first, she never wants to be the last. It's one of the hottest tickets on Broadway. A Strange Loop just opened in April, and it's already selling out seats and winning awards, including the prestigious Tony for Best New Musical. Playwright Michael R. Jackson started writing the show back in 2003. Well, the show's star, Jacquel Spivey, he just graduated from college last year. This is his first Broadway role. I sat down with both of them to talk about the show and its success.
What's going on in New York? The plot to A Strange Loop might get your mind going around in circles. It's about a Broadway usher whose name is Usher, a black queer man who's writing a musical about a black queer man who's writing a musical.
It's sort of cycling through his own self-hatred and self-perception.
How much of it is autobiographical for you?
I would describe it as emotionally autobiographical, which is to say that I have felt everything that Usher has felt, but the events in the musical are not necessarily a one-to-one ratio of events in my life.
This is a character that I think a lot of people don't assume that they can relate to. Because it's like, oh, he's fat, he's black, he's queer, I could never. And then you just sit there and you watch someone who's like skinny and white and female, and they come up to you and they're sobbing, and they're like, I'm nothing like Usher, but I've been through this.
When I was sitting in the audience, I mean, I could feel and hear people connecting as it went along. I'm guessing you feel that too, and you hear that?
Yeah, it drives me. This is one of those shows, you know, you hear so many Broadway shows are like a machine, and it's like no matter what happens, this is how we do it, and this is how it goes. But the audience is a part of our show, and they play a factor in how we handle the night or the day. So it's really important that we connect.
And that connection is forged through some incredibly heavy themes.
It focuses on themes of self-hatred, self-perception, sexuality, religion, race.
So issues that are not controversial at all, that no one ever...
Yeah, and also the theater. The theater is also like a big theme in the show as well.
How do you hope people who see it walk away? What's the main thing you want them to take away from?
I want people to walk away from the show thinking about themselves, because at the core, that's what the show is about. It's about a person grappling with himself. And in that, a lot of audience members see themselves, even though the character might be very different from them.
Earlier this week, Jacquel was able to make a connection with a special audience member, a VIP, who surprised the cast.
A little birdie whispered something that a special guest was coming. And I saw the Secret Service. I just saw men in suits. And I'm like, now it has to either be Beyonce or it's the Obamas. And sure enough, Auntie Michelle came backstage to see us.
He was so gracious and so kind, and he hugged each one of us, and he told me that he was grateful to have been able to get an opportunity to walk around in my brain, which, was that shade? I don't know. Maybe it was. But if it was, I got shade from Michelle Obama. How many people get that?
Enjoy the shade, if that's what it was. So, in addition to all its other awards, A Strange Loop is the first musical by a black writer to win the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. It is playing now at the Lyceum Theater in Manhattan. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now. Stay with us. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.